Kia ora everybody and welcome back to Theology, where we are drinking tea and talking theology. Today we are drinking French Earl Grey tea, which is a really nice tea. It's an Earl Grey tea, but it's got flowers in it, so it's a bit florally, which takes a little bit edge off some of the bitter notes that can sometimes come out in Earl Grey tea. But yeah, it's really nice. I really like it. It's my dad's favourite tea. Today we are talking about the ecumenical councils and the 7 of them, what those 7 are, and just some useful background, because I have another video planned where I will be talking us through the 7 ecumenical councils, and this was meant to be one video, and then I kept writing and I was like, this is gonna have to be 2. This is just gonna be a bit long because it's much longer than some of my others. It's any more pages. I was like, wow. And I was originally like, oh, write the script and then put it up real quick. And then I spent a long time writing it compared to other scripts that I've spent writing. So hopefully it's thorough and in-depth. Tried to do a lot of research. But first off, we're talking about the ecumenical councils. So we need to understand what an ecumenical council is. And the ecumenical councils are councils of church leaders, and due to the time of which the 7 ecumenical councils took place, it was mostly bishops who got together to discuss aspects of church doctrine. However, what makes these special and why there have only been 7 is the idea of what ecumenical means. Now, if you go in the Catholic Church, they might talk about other ecumenical councils that have gone on. There might be the same in the Orthodox Church, but the Orthodox Church calls themselves the Church of the 7 Councils, so they're the ones that uphold exactly what those 7 councils were. And hopefully we all do, though. So, an ecumenical council essentially means that it is agreed upon, something to be ecumenical, it is agreed upon as foundational by the whole church. So this means every denomination and church group, theoretically, is meant to agree with the decisions that were made in this ecumenical council, and it is defined as the idea of a particular council of being universal and of huge significance to the church. And there hasn't been one that was agreed upon since 787 AD. And a council being defined this way had some changes between Roman Catholic and Orthodox definitions, where the Roman Catholic definition was regarded more to do with the Pope, where the Orthodox tradition was focused more on the idea of receptionism, so how well the council was received. However, there are debates around this idea of receptionism that I am not well versed in to speak to or speak on at all, because it's very, very complicated, and it goes back to 787 AD or potentially longer about this idea of receptionism. But in essence, a council can only really be deemed ecumenical after it has already taken place, and it depends on how well it was received. And sometimes this is a little bit complicated because it can take quite a bit of time to see how its reception plays out, because there are multiple factors that shape how these things come together and how these settle and land in the sand, basically. However, at the time the councils took place, and all of them took place before the formal schism is dated between the 2, the decisions were seen as immediately bindable and enactable, or immediately binding and enactable. What does an ecumenical council talk about? They're essentially defining what the church does and doesn't believe in. Most synods and councils that go on today still do this, but the ecumenical councils are focused more on these really core foundations of our faith. So what the church, capital C, everybody believes in. And that's why that's part of the reason that they're considered historical. And the councils were all considered to take place in a pretty foundational time for Christianity, while they were figuring out and determining what was and wasn't significant heresy. And it also took place after Constantine's conversion, So when more of the Roman Empire became Christian, allowing for the bishops to meet in relative safety and discuss church doctrines and teachings to determine what made Christianity and what made it not Christianity, but still using some of the same texts. This is pretty important because it helps us know what we believe, and the Bible can be interpreted in lots of different ways. It's figuring out how to hold all those parts together and then affirm that is good. And you might go, well, we don't really need, we should just be able to know what to believe based off our Bible. But if you're going to read that huge book and interpret every single word correctly, completely on your own, then I just thoroughly don't believe that you could do that, because I don't think that is possible. We interpret the Bible in community, and it is designed to be understood in community because God is all about community and relationship. That community is not just the community of our little church group or even our local church community, church area, but it is a global community and global, going back in time, going in the future community. There is a level of interpretation that we can learn from all of it, and that we can use words to affirm particularly what that means and why we mean that and how important that is, because while the idea is present in the text, having a specific word to express that's importance is particularly helpful. So some of these things that came from that, and a huge example of one which is still upheld by pretty much every Christian tradition today, and I would say is kind of, if you aren't going to believe and agree with what this says, then I would question the tradition in that, is the Creed, the Apostles' Creed, Nicene Creed, Chalcedon Creed, and those were created out of ecumenical council. Now, there are commonly agreed upon to be 7 ecumenical councils in Catholic and Orthodox circles, and then the disagreement begins about there being 8 or 9, or if there's been other ecumenical councils since, or what that means, and if those councils were ecumenical, and what does that mean, and why this, and it just gets very complicated because you get into debates that have no resolution, and if you say this or that, people are going to be but you're wrong, what about this? And I don't know enough. I'm not going to engage with that at all. I'm just talking about the 7 that we 100% know and agree upon as ecumenical. How many times am I going to say ecumenical so it doesn't feel like a word anymore? So I won't be talking about the ones in my next video that are debated, or ones that are accepted by Orthodox and not Catholic, or vice versa. But the focus of these ecumenical councils is really what's important. They were helping outline the fundamentals of the faith, what we are going to uphold as true and what we will not. And these conclusions were come to by a wide array of Christian bishops, both East and West, Eastern Empire and Western Empire, but the divide, the Great Schism that happened in 1154 is the official date for it, was divided by the Eastern Church and the Western Church. The Eastern Church became Orthodox and the Western Church became Catholics. So it is both of them as much as possible. The divide was there for significant cultural reasons. I will probably just make a whole separate video talking about the Great Schism at some point. But the wide array of Christian bishops who were in faithful dialogue with the scriptures. And you're but Zoe, had the scriptural canon even been determined at this point? How do we know they were even using the same Bible as we do? Well, they wrote things down. We have great records. Well, not great records, but actually pretty decent records in the course of history and what's going on. And so the earliest canon that we know of that they would have definitely been using is what's called the Muratorian canon. The only books that it excludes that we have in our modern Bible is Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, and 3 John. And the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament that they use, is still pretty much the same as the one we use today, because it is the same as was being used in rabbinical circles and that sort of thing up to the time of the Great Silence, and where that had been all settled. So yeah, we are pretty solid on the Old Testament. That's been pretty consistent throughout the whole time, as much as I can tell. I'll talk a bit more about this in another video at some point, about the making of Bibles in the canon. And so throughout this time, there's still a level of the canon being determined. However, what remained consistent was the Gospels, much of the Old Testament, Acts, Paul's letters. Jude was pretty consistent, and 1st and 2nd John were pretty consistent. And this, when I talk about them using the scriptures, that's mostly what I mean. And for what they're talking about, the Gospels and Paul's letters are probably the most fundamental, and the Old Testament probably the most fundamental to the understanding. There's this quote from Reverend Dr. Stephen Need in a book that he wrote about the ecumenical councils in the introduction that says, "The 7 councils arose out of many Trinitarian and Christological controversies of the first 8 centuries of Christianity, and produced much of the language and terminology that has been used for Christ ever since. Indeed, it was these councils that established the notions of orthodoxy and heresy that are still current. These councils are crucial, therefore, to an understanding not only of Christian history, but also of Christian identity today." These 7 ecumenical councils are all focused on these core tenets of the faith, focused on the Trinity and Jesus' identity, determining what it is that God reveals about himself to us and how we are meant to understand that. Now, this video will get very long if I now go through and talk through all the ecumenical councils. So I will end here, and we will talk through the councils next week. If you want to come along for the video next week, I recommend subscribing and that sort of thing, so that it will turn up when that video is up. So thank you. Goodbye.